What if I told you there was a boxer so slick, so untouchable, so impossibly elusive, that even the greatest fighters in the world couldn't land a clean punch on him? A man who didn't just win fights, he made world champions look like amateurs. A man who dominated 4 weight classes, dismantled legends, and is still to this day considered one of the greatest defensive artists to ever lace up a pair of gloves. His name was Pernell Whitaker, but the world knew him as Sweet Pea. Born in the housing projects of Norfolk, Virginia, this kid grew up scrapping on the streets before turning those instincts into pure boxing brilliance. He had over 200 recorded amateur fights, and by the time he stepped onto the biggest stage in sport, he was ready. He won Olympic gold at the 1984 Los Angeles Games and announced himself to the entire world. And when he turned pro, he became virtually impossible to beat. Today we are counting down the top 5 wins of the legend, the icon, the defensive genius, Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. Trust me, you do not want to miss a single one of these. Number 5, February the 18th, 1989. The Coliseum, Hampton, Virginia. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker versus Greg Haugen for the IBF lightweight title. This was the night Sweet Pea served notice to the entire boxing world. He was robbed against Ramirez. He knew it, everybody knew it, and now he was back, fighting in front of his hometown crowd on a mission with a point to prove. And what followed was nothing short of a pugilistic masterpiece. Greg Haugen was no pushover. Let's be clear about that. This man had competed in over 300 amateur fights, won tough man competitions in his native Alaska, pulled off a major upset to win a world title against Jimmy Paul, and had already defended that IBF belt twice in grueling 15-round wars with Vinny Pazienza. He was tough, experienced, a solid counterpuncher with a decent jab. Haugen belonged in boxing's upper echelon. He just had the misfortune of running into Pernell Whitaker on the worst possible night. From the opening bell, Sweet Pea came out flat-footed and stayed right in Haugen's face. No circling, no running, just pure, suffocating, in-your-face brilliance. Jarring double and triple jabs turned Haugen this way and that, before Whitaker ripped hooks into the body from both sides. By the second round, he had already taken full control. By the 5th, Haugen wasn't just being outboxed, he was taking a beating. The champion had prepared for a mover, a slick southpaw who would circle and pick his shots from the outside. Instead, he got an aggressive Sweet Pea who walked him down, refused to give ground on the inside, and used the ropes as a target range, snapping sharp shots to Haugen's face before digging both fists deep into the body. Haugen could only smile and mug after getting tagged, as if trying to pretend the shots weren't landing as cleanly as they were. They were. Then came the 6th round. Haugen threw a right hand. Whitaker rolled it off his shoulder, loaded up, and fired a straight left hand flush to Haugen's head. Down he went, to his knees. The first knockdown of Greg Haugen's entire career, amateur or professional. He rose quickly, shook his head in disgust, and would later claim he had tripped. The scorecards told a different story. The fight became a rout and a masterclass simultaneously. Near the end of the 7th, Whitaker forced Haugen to the ropes with 4 stinging right jabs, feinted a 5th, then clobbered him with a vicious straight left and an uppercut before following up with 7 thudding body shots. It was like watching an artist at work, Picasso with gloves on. Whitaker eased off slightly in the 8th and 9th, dancing, using the ring, still winning every second of every round. When a desperate Haugen tried to come on strong in the 10th, Sweet Pea put him straight back in his place, forcing him to the ropes and battering him with both hands like a stern teacher correcting a pupil who had forgotten his place. The final round told you everything you needed to know about both men. Whitaker spent the first 2 minutes showboating and circling, and then closed with an absolute flourish, unleashing one vicious combination after another. And after each one, the iron-chinned Haugen would smile, drop his hands, and shake his head as if to say, "That all you got?" And Sweet Pea would answer every single time with another sustained volley, bringing the Hampton crowd to their feet. When the final bell rang, before the scorecards were even read, Greg Haugen, showing the class of a true professional, applauded Pernell Whitaker. 2 judges scored it a shutout, 120 points to 107. The third had it 118 to 109. Not a single round on any card went to the champion. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker was the new IBF lightweight champion of the world. And this was only the beginning. Number 4. March the 6th, 1993. Madison Square Garden, New York City. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker versus Buddy McGirt for the WBC Welterweight Championship. Billed as pound for pound. Who's number 1? And that billing wasn't just promotional fluff. This was real. Both men were genuinely considered among the very best fighters on the planet, regardless of weight class. Alongside Julio Cesar Chavez and Terry Norris, Whitaker and McGirt sat at the absolute pinnacle of the sport. Whoever walked out of Madison Square Garden with that WBC belt was going to be recognized as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in boxing. The stakes could not have been higher. Whitaker came in as a 12-5 favorite, already the reigning IBF light welterweight champion, moving up a division to chase welterweight gold. McGirt, the champion, came in with a record of 59 wins, 2 losses, and a draw. A seasoned, intelligent, battle-hardened professional who had earned that WBC belt the hard way and defended it successfully multiple times. Both men were guaranteed 7-figure paydays. Whitaker earning $1.25 million, McGirt taking home $1 million. 10,814 fans packed into the Garden to find out who was truly the best. But here's what most people don't know going in. McGirt was not 100%. He had suffered a serious left shoulder injury during sparring in December, an injury so bad it would later be revealed as a completely torn rotator cuff, a tendon pulled entirely away from the front of his shoulder. He'd already fought Genaro Leon in January, essentially one-handed. When asked about it heading into the Whitaker fight, McGirt simply said it wasn't an injury, just tendinitis, and that he was going in at 95%. His manager's response after the fight was perhaps more honest. Before the fight, he had a bad arm. After the fight, he had a bad arm and $1 million. End of discussion. From the opening bell, the contrast in styles was immediately clear. Whitaker, fighting out of his southpaw stance, controlled distance with beautiful footwork and a sharp right jab, slipping just outside McGirt's reach and countering with clinical precision. McGirt pressed forward methodically, cutting off the ring, looking to force exchanges in close, the style that had brought him 60 professional victories. And for the early rounds, he made it competitive. He landed several smart punches and short combinations that reminded everyone exactly why he was the champion. But Whitaker took control through the middle rounds, with McGirt's left shoulder increasingly limiting what he could throw, that elite hook essentially taken away from him. Sweet Pea began to settle into his rhythm, slipping, countering, pivoting away, resetting the distance before McGirt could close it again. It was a tactical masterclass. Every time McGirt pressed, Whitaker had an answer. Every time McGirt thought he'd close the gap, Sweet Pea was already gone. The numbers tell the story clearly. Whitaker landed 314 punches from 768 thrown, a 41% success rate. McGirt connected on 238 from 717, at 33%. Over 12 rounds, that difference compounds into something decisive. When the final bell rang, one judge had it comfortably for Whitaker at 117 to 111. The other two had it close, 115 to 114 and 115 to 113. But all three pointed the same direction. Unanimous decision. Sweet Pea was the new WBC welterweight champion of the world. Whitaker described the victory as easy. McGirt, when asked about the loss, said simply, "My arm went. What can I say?" The torn rotator cuff required surgery just days after the fight. And if you think that's the end of this story, it isn't. McGirt would return, go 5-0 in his comeback, and a rematch would be agreed and fought in October 1994. But that is a story for another day. What matters here is this. On the 6th of March 1993, at Madison Square Garden, Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker walked into the welterweight division and immediately proved he belonged at the very top of it. Number 1 pound for pound, undeniable. Number 3, August the 20th, 1989, the Scope Arena, Norfolk, Virginia. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker versus Jose Luis Ramirez, the rematch. The IBF lightweight title and the vacant WBC lightweight title both on the line. This was personal. 17 months earlier, in Paris, Whitaker had broken his left hand early and was forced to box on the back foot for the majority of the night. He outworked Ramirez, outboxed him, and by the assessment of virtually everyone watching, won the fight. 2 of the 3 judges disagreed. It was a robbery, plain and simple, and it left a wound in Sweet Pea that would fester for a year and a half. Now he was back, on home soil, in front of his own people in Norfolk, Virginia. And Ramirez was no soft touch. 109 professional fights, only 7 losses, one of them to Julio Cesar Chavez, the man many regarded as the best pound-for-pound fighter on the planet. Yet even Chavez had never handled Ramirez as easily as what was about to happen. Whitaker's trainer, Georgie Benton, had the blueprint ready. Don't run, don't get cute, don't try to knock him out. Walk and slip. Be a ring general. Use the jab. Simple instructions, flawlessly executed. Everything began with Whitaker's right jab. Fast, hard, accurate. A rocket. It set up everything that followed. Double hooks, 2 left hands and a hook, blurring 5-punch bursts almost impossible to follow with the naked eye. Whitaker said afterwards he could have tied his left hand behind his back. The jab did everything. Midway through the 8th, he caught Ramirez flush on the chin with a hook straight left combination that was almost too fast for the eye to follow. Benton watched from ringside and said simply, "Good Lord." Yet Ramirez, with that iron chin, shook his head and kept shuffling forward. In the corner, Benton and promoter Lou Duva kept telling Sweet Pea the same thing. Forget the knockout. What you're doing is better than a knockout. Keep the same tempo. Don't change a thing. 2 of the 3 judges did not give Ramirez a single round for 11 straight. Then came the 12th. Whitaker knew the fight was won, and Sweet Pea, being Sweet Pea, decided the crowd deserved a show. Before heading out, Duva told him, "Keep moving. Keep working the jab. No crazy chances." Whitaker laughed, kissed the old man on the cheek, and said, "Don't worry, baby, don't worry." Duva immediately began to worry. Out in the ring, Whitaker took a flat-footed stance directly in front of a desperate Ramirez, who was throwing everything he had. With a slight smile on his face, Sweet Pea casually ducked and slipped every single shot. At one point, he sat down on the bottom rope. Ramirez still couldn't hit him. Then he stood up, turned his back on his beaten opponent, and strolled away, contemptuously, completely in control. One judge gave the final round to Ramirez, but still scored the fight 117 to 111 for Whitaker. The other 2 did not give Ramirez a single round all night. 120 to 109, 120 to 108, unanimous decision. Sweet Pea was now IBF and WBC lightweight champion of the world, avenging the Paris robbery in the most emphatic, most dominant, most stylish fashion imaginable. Back home in Norfolk, in front of his people, on his terms. Afterwards, someone asked what he would have done if the judges had robbed him again. He laughed. "They never would have got out of the building," he said. "Those other guys got away from me in Paris. This time, I would have found them. Justice served. Sweet Pea style." Number 2. May the 19th, 1990. Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas, Nevada. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker versus Azumah Nelson. The WBC and IBF lightweight titles on the line. This was not just any opponent. Azumah Nelson was one of the greatest featherweights of all time, a ferocious, hard-hitting champion from Ghana who had terrorized his division for years. His only career loss had come against the immortal Salvador Sanchez, and even then, Nelson was winning that fight until Sanchez produced an incredible 15th-round knockout to stop him. That tells you everything about the kind of man Whitaker was stepping in with. Tough, dangerous, experienced, and absolutely capable of ending a fight with either hand. The matchup was billed as a genuine 50-50 affair. Nelson was a 3-1 underdog on paper, but in practice, most expected him to bring real heat, to pressure Whitaker, rough him up, and make it an ugly, uncomfortable night. Whitaker was the technical master. Nelson was the warrior. Something had to give. What actually happened was something else entirely. From the opening bell, Sweet Pea took complete control. Not gradually, immediately. He dictated range, controlled the pace, and made one of boxing's most feared punchers look ordinary. Over 12 rounds, Whitaker landed 464 punches from 989 thrown, a 47% success rate. Nelson, despite throwing 739 punches, connected on just 179, 24%. Nearly half of everything Whitaker threw landed. Less than a quarter of everything Nelson threw found its target. That is not a competitive fight. That is a shutout disguised as a contest. Nelson never stopped trying. He pressed forward, he applied pressure, he threw his shots. But Sweet Pea made him pay for every single one. The head movement, the timing, the subtle shifts in distance that made clean punching virtually impossible. It was all on full display. Nelson was swinging at smoke and getting tagged with leather every time he tried. And then came the 12th round. With the fight long since decided, Sweet Pea's inner showman couldn't resist. He lifted Nelson's leg with his right hand and tapped him on the head with his left. Referee Mills Lane, one of the most no-nonsense officials in the history of the sport, was absolutely not amused and immediately deducted a point from Whitaker. One judge, clearly unimpressed with the theatrics, scored the final round 10-8 for Nelson. It didn't matter. All three judges scored it for Whitaker. 115-113, 116-111, 116-114. The unofficial Associated Press scorecard had it 117-110. Unanimous decision. Azumah Nelson, one of the greatest fighters of his era, had been battered and bewildered for 12 rounds by the best defensive fighter who ever lived. Whitaker had now made his fourth defense of the IBF title and his second defense of the WBC title, and he had done it against a genuine legend of the sport and made it look almost effortless. At just 26 years old, Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker was operating on a level that very few fighters in the history of boxing have ever reached. And the best was still to come. Number 1. September the 10th, 1993. The Alamo Dome, San Antonio, Texas. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez. Billed simply as The Fight. And there is a reason we are counting this as number 1. Because even though the record books call it a draw, every single person who watched it knows the truth. Sweet Pea won this fight, convincingly. The context is everything. Chavez came in at 87 wins, 0 losses, 73 of those by knockout. The number 1 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet, according to the Ring magazine, a position he had held for 3.5 years. A ferocious pressure fighter from Culiacan, Mexico, who had destroyed everyone put in front of him. Meldrick Taylor, Greg Haugen, Ramirez. Nobody could stop him. And now 65,000 screaming Mexican fans packed into the brand new Alamo Dome, waving red, white, and green flags, fully expecting their hero to do it again. Whitaker had to concede to almost every one of Chavez's demands just to get the fight made. The venue, Chavez's territory. The catchweight, 145 pounds, 2 pounds below the welterweight limit to suit Chavez. Even the judges were largely WBC appointments. Sweet Pea didn't care. He wanted Chavez in the ring, and he got him there. From the opening bell, Whitaker settled into what he called his sleeping style, a slippery, loose, almost casual way of carrying himself that made him virtually impossible to hit cleanly. Chavez pressed forward as he always did, but he couldn't solve the puzzle. Whitaker's jab landed 130 times to Chavez's face over 12 rounds. 130. Overall, Whitaker landed 311 punches to Chavez's 220. He was winning every exchange and barely getting touched in return. By the middle rounds, Chavez looked feckless, confused, and desperate. A perfectly executed uppercut shook him to his boots. The great crowd, 65,000 Chavez faithful, fell eerily, tellingly silent. Even they could see what was happening. Chavez had his moments, the 5th, the 9th, but they were brief interruptions in a masterclass. By the final bell, Chavez had blood seeping from his nose and looked a beaten man. Then the judges spoke. One judge, the sole American Jack Woodruff, scored it correctly, 115-113 for Whitaker. The other two, both WBC appointments, scored it 115-115, a draw. The Alamo Dome booed. Showtime's presenters, sat at ringside, unanimously condemned the decision. Sports Illustrated put Whitaker on the cover of their next issue with one word across it: robbed. The now defunct Boxing Illustrated told readers on their cover not to buy the issue if they genuinely believed the fight was a draw. The scandal ran deeper still. British judge Mickey Vann later admitted he had independently docked Whitaker a point in the 6th round for a low blow, something only a referee can legally do. Referee Joe Cortez had not deducted the point. Vann did it anyway, in direct violation of the rules. Dan Duva filed an official protest. It was never overturned. Officially, it stands as a draw. But this is Sweet Pea's number 1 win, because that is exactly what it was. A win. Dominant, brilliant, and disgracefully stolen from him on the night. Chavez's unbeaten record survived by politics, not by performance. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker gave the greatest defensive exhibition of his career against the most feared fighter of his generation, in enemy territory, in front of 65,000 hostile fans. And he won. Everyone knows it. The record books just haven't caught up yet.